How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. My name is Corey, and we're going to go through a last batch of spoilers today. For those that are wondering, I do have a video coming on the prototypes and the commands coming up here soon, so I did not forget those cards. They are coming along on their own videos. For now, let's get into the cards. Alright, as we move along here, I'll go ahead and read the cards, and I'll give you my thoughts on them as we go. First up, we have Lauren's Escape. For a white, you get an instant that says, target artifact or creature gains hexproof and indestructible until end of turn, scry 1. This is in the vein of God's Willing, and this in a lot of cases is better than God's Willing because of the hexproof and the indestructible. God's Willing is pro color and you can use it to like punch damage through with, but in this case, this is better for board sweeps because you can't protect against that. Next up, we have what people are calling a black factor fiction. This is hostile negotiations. For 3 and a black, you get an instant that says exile the top 3 cards of your library in a face down pile, and then exile the next 3 cards face down, also in another face down pile. Look at the cards in each pile, and then turn a pile of your choice face up. Your opponent chooses one of the 2 piles, and that one goes to your hand, and the other one goes to your graveyard, and then you lose 3 life. It's got a lot of similarities with Factor Fiction. It does cost 3 or 4. It is a instant speed spell. You get to look at more cards than you do with a Factor Fiction, and your opponents do choose things. But, you know, there's some subtle differences here. Like Factor Fiction, you get a little more choice in the matter. They can 5-0 the piles or whatever. This one, it's just like, okay, well, here you go. Pick your poison. And sometimes they're going to pick stuff that's just absolute crap, and you're not going to have a choice as to what's going away. Whereas with Factor Fiction, they divide up the piles and you go, oh, I'll take that one. This one, they get to choose. So it's not quite there, but it might be decent. We'll have to watch this one. Next up is Yoshin Tacticsian. For 2 white blue, you get a human soldier, and it's just a Lord's card. Other soldiers you control get +1/+1, and it's a 3/4. For an uncommon Lord's card, this is kind of disappointing after the cycle from Ixalan, where they gave Merfolk and Vampires a 2-mana Lord effect for, black, white, green, blue, those kind of things. Why is this one? I mean, I understand this one's bigger. Those were 2/2s. This is a 3/4. But why didn't they just make this a 2/2 for white, blue and do the same thing? It would have actually matched up against those lords. This is kind of pricey for what it is. Now, that said, this will see play in Standard if there's a soldier deck that's going to get made. This will probably see play in any kind of commander decks that are going to be made off of the white, blue, or Jeskai, or whatever color set variant you want to build off of. But I'm kind of disappointed at how expensive the casting cost is of this card. This is Meticulous Excavation. For a white, you get an enchantment that says pay 2 and a white, return target permanent you control to its owner's hand, and if it has Unearth, exile it instead, then return the card to its owner's hand. Activate only during your turn. So this is a way to reuse ETB abilities. Now, someone mentioned online that, oh boy, we get to reuse things like Dockside Extortionist in Commander. That's probably one of the more broken ways you could use the card. The thing I see here, especially with that bit about the Unearth, is you can unearth something, normally you lose it, it gets exiled, but instead you pay the extra 3 here, exile it, and then you get it back to recast it and do it all over again. So this has some functional purposes. This is also good for things that you need to bring back, like maybe you used a Banishing Light on somebody's thing and they play something that's way more threatening you need to get rid of. Okay, play this, bounce the Banishing Light back to my hand, you'll get your other little creature I swiped earlier, and then I'll take that thing out instead. It's got a lot of good applications, especially in Commander, but we'll see what happens with the other formats. This is Scrapwork Mutt. For 2 colorless, you get a 2/1 dog artifact creature that says when it enters, you can discard a card, and if you do, draw a card, and it has Unearth for 1 and a red. Red aggro decks are kind of hurting for card selection, and they're also hurting for like a decent threat that can come back and keep punching. This is actually not a bad little low-to-the-ground creature for those kind of things in Standard, if a red aggro deck ever actually re-emerges. Outside of that, it's an alright card. I don't know if I'd play it in Commander, but for Standard, I think it's an alright card. This is Recommission. This one's getting a lot of talk online. For 1 and a white, you get a sorcery that says return target artifact or creature card with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. If a creature enters the battlefield this way, it comes in with a +1/+1 counter on it. Pauper players are kind of going nuts for this thing, and I can see why. We already have access to Unearth. For a black, you get to do the same kind of thing. You return a 3 CMC creature to from the graveyard to the battlefield. This is doing it in white, but it also allows you to get artifacts, and it allows you to put a counter on that creature. And in Pauper, you're usually pretty low to the ground for creature decks to begin with, just because common cards are generally lower to the ground anyhow. So, I think if there is either a soldier deck, or two, some kind of white aggro deck that's low to the ground for standard, this card is likely to see some sort of play there. And I could even see this. Don't quote me on this. It's probably a hot take. I could see this card being used with Grease Fang instead of the Can't Stay Away. Because Can't Stay Away makes it so the card gets exiled when it comes back if it dies again. With this, you just bring it back. Hey, there's Grease Fang all over again. Here we go. I could see maybe doing like a 2-2 split with that card, or maybe just replacing it all together with recommission. This is terribleista for 7 colorless. You get a 5/3 menace that has Unearth of 3 and 2 black, and when it attacks, you may sacrifice another creature, and if you do, destroy target creature an opponent controls. Depending on how standard shakes out, if it's going to become more of a ramp into big dumb stuff type thing, this card's actually pretty good. It's a 5/3, which basically turns it into a Juggernaut type card. That it swings, you sack some little fodder creature, or maybe a creature that comes back from the graveyard, that like a cult conscript or something of that nature, or a reconstructing skeleton, something of that nature. You can just sack it, swing, blow up their stuff, and you have a 5/3 that has to have 2 creatures to block it. So you're more than likely you're going to punch in for that damage and get rid of something of theirs. This is actually not a bad card. I kind of want to see what this does. Here we have Artificer's Dragon. For 6 colorless, you get a 4/4 dragon with flying. Not exactly the most exciting stat line in the world, but it also has Unearth for 3 red, and the thing that excites me the most for this card is it also has pay a red. Artifact creatures you can control get +1/+0 until end of turn. Now, the exciting part with that is in Commander especially, you have access things like Thopters, Servos, all kinds of artifact creatures already exist in those decks. With this, you're turning your little 1/1s into some decent threats as you get going. And right now, Standard is also pushing all of these artifact soldier tokens in a lot of aspects. So this can be used to actually pump those up and make them legitimate threats. I like this card. I want to keep an eye on this one. This is Legions to Ashes. For 1, a white and a black, you get a sorcery that says exile target non-land permanent an opponent controls, and all tokens that player controls with the same name as that permanent. Now, this has applications across the board. In Standard, you're going to be attacking their Power Stone tokens that are going to be created in the new format. In other formats, you're like, oh, I made a bunch of soldier tokens. Exile all your soldier tokens. Exile, or like maybe, or this is kind of fun. Maybe they're cloning stuff and making copies of things that have token copies. You can nuke all the copies of whatever's being cloned out over and over and over again. I mean, they're just gone. The only downside, and people are complaining about that, it is sorcery speed, and there are other 3-mana sorcery speed removal spells, or instant speed removal spells, that will do the same kind of thing, like Anguished Unmaking and that kind of stuff in Commander and those kind of formats. So it's hard to tell where this will see play. I would probably run it just to run it alongside of Anguished Unmaking, to be honest. But in Standard, this will probably see play, especially if Power Stone tokens become a big deal. Speaking of Power Stone tokens, this is Battery Bearer. For 2, a green and a blue, you get a 3/4 human artificer that basically turns all of your creatures into Power Stone tokens. It gives them the ability to tap, add a colorless that can't be spent on non-artifact spells. And whenever you cast an artifact spell with mana value 6 or greater, draw a card. So when it comes down to big green dumb ramp, this is probably going to be a key linchpin piece of that particular kind of deck. Rather than, we don't have a ton of mana dorks that are on the cheap, like 1 and 2 mana stuff like Llanowar Elves and that kind of thing. But if you slam this down with a few, lower to the ground creatures, and then all of a sudden you're like, tap this, drop a big artifact creature behind it. This has promise in Standard. This has promise all over the place in Commander. I don't know about other formats, but we'll see. But I like this card. I'm going to watch this one. This is Gixxian Infiltrator. For 1 and a black, you get a 2/1 Phyrexian human that says whenever you sacrifice another permanent, put a +1/+1 counter on it. Now, in the last 6 months or so, there's been a pretty decent black-red sacrifice deck in Standard. And there's also some black-red sacrifice stuff going on in Pioneer. And I think this card would slot in pretty damn well with those decks. It gives you a nice little 2-drop that as you're sacrificing stuff, treasures, blood, all these things that are getting sacrificed, you use your Oni Cult Anvils to eat other artifacts. Just these things are dying over and over. This thing's just going to keep growing and growing and growing, and eventually it's going to be a big threat that they either need to kill outright or it's just going to run them over. And the last card I have for today, because I think this is the last day of the previews, Rescue Retriever. For 3 white, you get a 3/3 dog soldier with flash that says when it enters the battlefield, put a counter on each other soldier you control and prevent all damage that will be dealt to other attacking soldiers you control. So this is a fun little combat stunt that you can go ahead and go, I'm going to swing all my stuff, knowing that your combat's probably going to suck against your opponent, and your opponent knows that fact. But if you have this available to you and they flash it in, all of a sudden it's like, oh, my stuff's bigger. They trade more comparably in combat. Oh, but they're not going to trade because now the combat damage on the attack is prevented. And so your opponent's going to get basically a big blowout if they don't block correctly. Like, they may actually have to start blocking with the thought, okay, they have 5 mana open. Do they have a Rescue Retriever? Because if you aren't careful, you're screwed. So what do you guys think? Do you agree with my assessments of these cards? Let me know in the comments below. And as always, thank you for watching. Have a great day and keep an eye out for more videos coming in the future.